I've been here before. Between the pages of a narrative whose ending is bleak. A thriller, if you will. Twists and turns have cultivated knots in my stomach. I can barely inhale because I'm full, but I haven't been nourished. How do you explain this setting? A parent being ripped away from their child, a family sleeping in two different places, a mother waiting to reunite the child with their teddy bear, a child who's coddled to sleep by their mother's absence. How do you tell the story of a student with no resources, looking at their counterparts being gifted with the future while he's told to put in the work? Sent on a quest to find something that structures have systematically hid from him. How do you conjure up a turning point? When a child's only rising action starts and ends in an art camp, only to have that art teach them that they have purpose. Paintings and figures have services with children. The sermon is to give them faith that lasting change will finally come. These are stories, not confined to the binding of a book. These words are reality. Real life instances where lives have changed in an instant. And now I ask you, what do we do? Do we allow the story to end with our lip service? Do we rely on our default responses in the face of truth? Or do we bring them a blank slate and tell them it's time for a new chapter? It's our time to change the trajectory of these stories, to use our connected stories as a net that catches children who are sinking deeper into doubt. That same net will then bring resources to those parents so they can be reunited with their child. We will then use that same net to track the future, deliver it fresh to the student in need of an opportunity. Our stories connected create a network, unbreakable bonds that carry each other to the finish line, then lining up like an army to fight against every system designed to disrupt families. My family here tonight, I look to you. Yes, you are the answer. Will you answer the call? The call for truth, and the truth is that we need each other. Humanity in all its complexities is still tied together by one commonality. And tonight we rediscover that connection is powered by our own individual stories. Thank you guys so much. And with that, I'll say welcome to everyone. Welcome to our benefit and our fundraiser here on tonight. My name is Rapheal Mathis, and I will be your MC for this evening. It's so good to look out here and see each and every one of your faces. So let's give it up for everybody in the room tonight, all right? So just to let you know a little bit about myself, in addition to coming up here and shouting to quiet the room down, I am a Find Your Future alum. So I'm a product of Kaleidoscope and one of the programs that it offers. I did 2 internships with Find Your Future. And the crazy thing is, after I graduated college, my first hosting of the fundraiser, actually, I think I just did the paddle raise that year. There was an employer there that saw me and that linked in my first job. So I'm very thankful for Kaleidoscope tonight. And we're now going on and done other things, but I'm so thankful and honored to be here. This is my 5th year hosting. And so we're here to have a good time, to learn, and to raise some money. All right? That sound good? Okay, I was like, don't get personal when I start saying money. But we're going to jump right in. And before we jump in, I just want to get a pulse for the room, see who we have in here with us. So, if you were here in 2019, can you give me a little hand raise? Just a little wave. Okay, that's a good number. That's a good number. Okay. And thank you for coming back. If you attended one of our virtual events in 2020 or 2021, give me a wave. Okay, so we got some virtual people who are now here in person. I love you too. And then, if this is your first ever Kaleidoscope event, give me another wave. Give me another wave. All right, so let's welcome the new people as well. That is absolutely amazing. And I said welcome to each and every one of you. Whether you were here pre-pandemic, you found out about us in the pandemic, or post-ish pandemic, we're so glad to have you here with us. But we want to give a few thank yous because without the amazing people of Kaleidoscope, none of this would be possible. So our first thank you will go to the development team. Can we clap our hands for them? And of course, we want to give a thank you to the board of Kaleidoscope. So let's make some noise for them as well. And then we also want to thank all of our volunteers that are helping making this event possible. So you guys scream for them. And the reason I took the screen for them because they are also staff here at Kaleidoscope. So that means that they worked all day and they came here and made sure everything was what it needed to be. So we thank you all for your volunteering on tonight. And then lastly, give a hand for yourself for being here, all right? Oh, you guys can do that. Give a hand for yourself for being here. That's absolutely amazing. Tonight, you're going to your stories. Our theme for tonight is stories that connect. And so each story may seem independent because each independent person will come up here. But as we go through the evening, you will see that there is a thread of connectivity in Kaleidoscope's work. Stories that connect is not just some fancy thing that we put together. We are reinforcing it with the speakers that we have here with us. So first you'll hear from DJ, who is a community clinician and a former youth in care. And he has a special connection to our guest speaker, Bryan, and you're gonna have to be listening for the connection, all right? I may come back up here and quiz you, so make sure that you're paying attention, all right? So then we will hear from Kathy, who will speak about what's happening here at Kaleidoscope and what's ahead for 2023, and that's gonna be the 50th year, you guys. Kaleidoscope next year would have been in existence for 50 years. I hope I get to come back for year 50. Just putting that out there. Just putting that out there. I hope I get to come back. And then after that, after we hear from Kathy, like I said, we'll hear from Bryan Samuels, the executive director of Chapin Hall, and what's happening in the field of child welfare and how Kaleidoscope is on the forefront of that. And for my connection, Bryan founded the Find Your Future program. So I have a special connection to that. And actually, Elizabeth is here as well, who I spoke to as well. And she also founded it, helped found Find Your Future. And so I am the fruit of your labor, Bryan and Elizabeth. So I thank you for your vision back then and for having the heart to say students need internships while they're in college because that's the way they get experience as they go out into the real world. So I thank you guys for that. And I hope you know that the work that you put in there is affecting lives even today. And in addition to that, after we get through with all those amazing words, I'm going to come back up here and wrap it up with another spoken word piece. Now, there were some words somewhere. I don't know. If somebody grabbed the words from the back, I'm making somebody run. I apologize. But there, you guys had the opportunity to write some words down when you came in. And so, what we're going to do tonight, this is something that I do. You can bring it up. This is something that I do via Instagram for a while. Every Monday, I would get online, I would ask my followers for 5 words, and based on that, I would create a spoken word piece and then post it later on in the day. Now we're doing that tonight on steroids. So I will pick 10 words and I will have until everyone gets through talking, and I hope they talk slow, to create a spoken word piece that I will get up here and say at the end. So I'm gonna pick those. Wait, hold on, let me count these. Okay, so these 10 words that I just counted are going to be the words. So let me read them out to you guys. That way you know that I actually did words out of here. So to air, humor, purpose, free, strength, empathetic, grateful, vulnerable, laughter, and hope. And hope. So these are going to be my words. Let me put this somewhere safe so I don't lose them. And once I'm done with this, you probably won't see me for a few minutes because I'll be feverishly writing. All right. So, in addition to that, We don't want you guys to forget that the silent auction and raffles happening at the back of the room. That's a lot of good stuff back there. I hope you guys have gone and perused and looked at everything that is available. Please make sure that you bid for the silent auction. If I'm remembering correctly, you have to sign up in order to bid for the silent auction. Is that correct? Yes. So if you've not signed up, please make sure that you do that. And is all of it online? Yes, all of it is online. So go back there and look, then hop on the Kaleidoscope website, start bidding, and hopefully you can win something that's back there. In addition to that, we also have a raffle that is going to be happening. So please get your raffle tickets in the back of the room. I'm going to come back later and announce the raffle numbers, but you have to be here in order to get the prize. So don't leave too early. Make sure that you say that way you can win something in the raffle. And then I want to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Perfect, perfect. I think I have covered everything that you guys need to know. We've gotten the house rules out the way. So let's continue to get this thing going. Now, before I run off stage and begin writing the spoken word piece, I want to introduce our first speaker on tonight, which is DJ. DJ is an ECCS community clinician at Kaleidoscope, where he works directly with children and families to access the care and support they need. DJ earned his master's in social work administration in 2020, and he'll tell you more about how he came to Kaleidoscope and what drives him to do his work. So we want to encourage every speaker that's going to come up here. So as DJ is walking to the stage, I want you guys to give the loudest round of applause and make them feel real welcome, all right? We're welcome to DJ to the stage.
Thank you, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Hello, everyone. My name is DJ Ditto, and at the beginning of the month, I celebrated my 1 year anniversary as an ECCS community clinician here at Kaleidoscope. An important piece of information to know about me is that I'm a former foster youth who now works in child welfare, giving me a unique insider and outsider perspective at the system. I'd like to share with you a little bit about my journey through the child welfare system and how that has shaped my ability to better serve kids and families here at Kaleidoscope. I was born and raised in Central California in the city of Fresno. I'm the middle child. I have an older sister and a younger sister. My older sister was our second mom when our mom was out doing whatever, wherever, with whomever. And until my sister got out of our home when I was about 14, she moved in with her grandparents. I knew that what was happening in my house wasn't okay. My siblings and I looked to the child welfare system as a way to save us because nobody else could or would. Like so many kids, we just felt stuck with our abusive parents until finally I had enough proof to do something about it, and I did. I remember thinking I can't wait to get to the next thing so that I could have some more separation. Before I was 16, I couldn't wait to drive so that I could just leave. Before I was 18, I couldn't wait, or until I was 18, I couldn't wait until to just get away and be, so that I could be whatever I wanted and do whatever I wanted. I began to involve myself in every school activity you could think of, just so I didn't have to go home. And when it was time to go home, was whether it be just to do homework, eat, sleep, I dreaded it. And when excuse me, sorry. I'm unique in some ways. Not everyone should or even wants to be removed from their home, and because of that, I work hard to keep families together whenever possible in my role today. But for me, foster care was the best possible option. In some ways, my foster home was a safe haven, but it was not easy. I felt very let down by the workers and the people who were supposed to care for me time and time again. I ended up being in a total of 3 different foster homes until I finally found my long-term foster placement when I was 17. I'm still in contact very much and connected with my foster family, so much so that I've become a branch on the family tree. When I went to college, I stayed close. My dorm was only about 10 minutes away. I stayed active with fellow foster youth as well. I was involved in the Renaissance Scholars Program, which is a foster youth support program at my undergrad university, and I worked as a student coordinator for 2 years. Even in college, I wanted to be a voice for students, and that started my transition from being a part of the system to working in it. For a little context, I participated in the Cal Youth Study, a longitudinal research study that looks at the outcomes of transitional age foster youth ages 15 to 26 in California. The study was led by a well-known researcher in child welfare, Dr. Mark Courtney at the University of Chicago. I'd initially gone to college for physical therapy, but then I found out when we had to work with cadavers, that was not for me. I can't. As I got more active with other foster youth, I knew that I wanted to work with other youth in care like me. I applied for grad school to get my master's degree in social work. My top pick was UCLA, and I was heartbroken when I didn't get in. But I did get into my backup school, the University of Chicago. Seriously, seriously, I had no idea, not a single clue that the University of Chicago is what it is. When I got to campus, I definitely felt imposter syndrome. I felt like, am I supposed to be here? I'm a foster youth from Central California, and I don't deserve to be here. Somebody has to have made a mistake somewhere, but I'm here and I'm doing fine. So I basically accepted admissions because the lead on the How You Study I mentioned, Dr. Courtney, is from U Chicago and Chapin Hall, and offered me a position to work on the How You Study. But then early on in my grad school internship, someone told me college admissions don't make mistakes. It's a process that is carefully reviewed. And I think that's true. In grad school, I had the opportunity to work on the How You Study. So I'm not only represented in this amazing, huge research project as a data point, but also as a collaborator. I graduated with my master's in social service administration in 2020. As you can imagine, graduating into a pandemic and to the state of the world is what it was scary. I had always wanted to work with foster youth in higher education, and because of the time of what was going on, it was tough to find a job given the state of the world. So I ended up accepting a position with another child welfare agency in Chicago. One of the cases I worked with was personally one of the best and hardest that I've ever had. The case was a young man who was in a complicated situation, but I had so much hope for him. He was someone who I really connected with, and through my work with him, he trusted me. We had a great relationship as a worker in a youth in care, and I saw the amazing support that he was getting from Kaleidoscope through the ECCS program. You can see where this is going. The Kaleidoscope staff member assigned to that case was Ellie. She isn't here tonight, but she's now my supervisor. In my very first meeting with her when I worked at that child welfare agency, she told me she was going to coach me and bring me over to her team. I was very hesitant because this was my first full-time job out of college. 9 months later, I started at Kaleidoscope. As we will hear tonight, and you may know yourself, this work isn't easy, and we definitely don't do it for money. And as a youth in care, I felt let down by caseworkers in many different ways. I felt like they weren't really helping. And because of that, I never wanted to work in the system directly because of how much I had to deal with as a kid. But over time, I realized that being in social work is exactly the place to connect with people and to make the change. I have this draw to people, and I love to connect with people. And being in social work, again, is just the place to do that. As youth in care, I looked to these systems to save me, but it all felt very half-assed. As an employee in child welfare, it still feels very half-assed. But that's when I lean in. I lived through the system that disappointed me, and I learned from it. I can ensure that my experience won't be everyone's experience. However, I can be someone who sheds lights on the opportunities that are often not talked about. And at Kaleidoscope, I feel supported at every level so that I can support my cases from top down and all around. I'll also note that I have a unique position as a male social worker. As a youth, I often saw that male social workers were not present or involved. And even now, I still have a hard time connecting and working with male social workers. But I have a responsibility to connect with the families in Kaleidoscope's programs, and I do my very best to make that happen. But even standing here today, I continue to find disappointment in the system, both personally and professionally. As Ellie says, my job is to be that annoying voice for our families. Because I would rather be the person that finds the closed doors rather than having my families be the ones that find those closed doors. So that I can continue to point them in the direction of the opportunities that best fit their situation. Things in child welfare are broken. You'll hear tonight what we can do to fix them on a systematic level, and I'm thankful to be a part of that. In the meantime, I'm in the room, and so are my colleagues, to see what's broken and fix it for our families. As a final note, I do want to say that it's not all bad. I had multiple small, medium, and big wins for my families. I've seen kids get reunited with their birth families, and I've witnessed a decrease in mental health symptoms so that a youth does not have to go to a hospital. My favorite thing about my job is when a youth or caregiver lets me in and they trust me fully in the capacity that I work with them. Those are the shining moments when my heart lights up and I feel like my superpowers are activated as well. Thank you.
I say this every year. Why do I have to follow Raphael and DJ? uh, what an honor to be here this evening with you all. My name is Kathy Grzelak, and I have the pleasure to serve as the Executive Director of Kaleidoscope. Before I get too far into the program, I'd like to thank our sponsors. Maybe showing up behind me. Our presenting sponsor, TransUnion, I know they're over here. I think for our 5th year in a row, alongside of Raphael. Our fuel sponsor, Blue Dog, and I know they're represented up here. Northern Trust, GMC, Microtech, and Wheatland Tube as our Blair sponsors. And Assured Partners, GCG Financial, and X10 Commercial. Thanks again to all our sponsors for making this possible. And what did DJ go? Thank you, DJ, for sharing your story, your journey, and opening those closed doors for families. I was going to say something really smart about connection and why we're here and stories that connect. I think Raphael knocked that out of the park, so I can scratch that off the part of my speech tonight. But really, it's so great to be in person again after 2 years virtually. And we've shared powerful stories virtually, but it just doesn't have the same feeling as being present with you all and seeing you all here together, gathered in community at Kaleidoscope. Last week, I had an in-person orientation for the first time in 2 years with the new team members at Kaleidoscope. And it's always such a joy to be in the room and feel the energy and the commitment and the perseverance that comes through with each and every staff member and how they show up every day to this important work. And for the first time in 2 years, to see people laughing and talking and sharing stories in person, not on Zoom or whatever platform you all have had to get used to in the last 2 years. Me, it's been Zoom, and it's taken a while, but I got there. As part of orientation, I asked everyone, what is it that motivates you to do this work? And every time I do that, I get amazing answers, right? The answers that you want to hear from people that are truly doing this kind of work and on the forefront of working with children and families. And one of them said, Kaleidoscope does human work. And not child welfare, not social services. We do human work. And it really resonated with me, and I went back to my office, I got a sticky note, and I have sticky notes for those of you who come in my office, and I have it on my laptop, and I'm like, I'm going to use that for stories that connect. I've been in this field 30 years, and I have not heard anyone use those words, human work. But I do think it's something that really articulates what we do every day. I'd love to say that in the last 2 years, we've eradicated structural racism and violence. But as you heard this weekend, racially motivated shootings continue to plague our nation and our communities locally. At the top of the pandemic, systemic violence, war, and everything else, our field has had challenges with workforce turnover and pay equity. This work has only gotten harder amidst our cultural reckonings that never seem to make quite enough change. But more than ever, Kaleidoscope's commitment to kids and families has stayed true. Last year, we served over 900 children and families. There are so many stories, like DJ shared some of his obstacles and those triumphs. From taking shifts 24/7 in an ER with one of our young people so that they would have someone by their sides and to advocate is one example. Staff driving around all hours of the night trying to find a young person that we knew was at risk and on run and we were concerned for his safety. Or on the triumph side, a young man we just found out got a full scholarship to U of I and will be attending in the fall. Yes. And a sibling group of two young people who have had their own long journey and they're finally in a forever home and will be adopted soon. Even though the pandemic would have wanted otherwise, with continuances and our systems not working exactly the way they have. Our staff have been persistent and persevered through all these obstacles. And I think this is a good time to, I know we've shouted out our staff earlier, but wave your hands when you get a break. Folks on their namesake says a flight school. Please go and say hi to them. They got lots to share. We've all had to navigate a new normal, if we even know what normal is anymore. Yes, my whole family's sharing glances because they make fun of me because I've said the word navigate more times than they want to hear on a daily basis, and I think I've made a game of it. But to navigate is to steer the course according to what is in front of you. Collectively as an agency and individually as team members, Kaleidoscope has navigated every complication in order to meet the needs of our family, as well as balance our own needs as staff, helpers, humans. Primary problem our families face is poverty, plain and simple. Over 60% of the hotlines calls made are due to neglect. We can see that direct link between poverty and neglect. Poverty is about a lack of access and opportunity. And for our families, the combination of poverty and systemic racism makes it often impossible to access tools, resources, and support. The very systems, as DJ also articulated, created to help families have been inaccessible or broken really since their inception. And the pandemic has also highlighted, again, that the inequities and disproportionate responses that exist for our families. We cannot live free from abuse and neglect until we address the core problems in our country and beyond, and it will require rethinking child welfare altogether. Kaleidoscope is doing just that. We have realigned our strategic plan this year to emphasize a focused prevention framework that will honor connectivity within communities so our families can thrive. Right now, we're in the process of adapting every one of our programs to be more preventative in nature and building coalitions within our community that we live in now to strengthen capacity and access for all of our families. Our pledge tonight is that we will rebuild and advocate for a better child welfare and a better future for all of our Chicago families. By leveraging community connections and elevating our parent and youth voice, we know we will succeed with all your support. Next year, as Rapheal said, we will celebrate our 50th year anniversary. Mark your calendars for June 6th. Okay, get an extra raffle ticket if anyone got their pocket calendar. If they even have pocket calendars, I don't think it does, but June 6th, we'll share updates on our new prevention model, and we'll recognize the revolutionary model of care that our founders saw 50 years ago. And we're so excited about the possibilities ahead. But I want to take a moment now to recognize that we lost two of Kaleidoscope's champions this past year. Founding Executive Director Mel Breed and my predecessor and friend Tom Finley. Both passed away in 2021. Many of you are here tonight because of Mel and Tom, and I know you miss them as much as we do. Mel was the founding member of Kaleidoscope, and he had the vision. I had the pleasure of speaking with Mel for our 45-year anniversary, and we were on the phone for about 40 minutes, and he was so excited and shared all the myths that I heard about how Kaleidoscope was started, and he actually validated most of them. That's for our 50 year. I'll share more about that. But he was so truly excited that Kaleidoscope was alive and thriving, and we were looking forward to connecting, and he was planning on coming and being a guest at our 50th, but I learned of his passing later this fall. We have a short video that we're going to show from Carl Dennis, who was the second director of Kaleidoscope, who worked alongside of Mel in the 70s through his own retirement. So, Julie?
Mel Green was pretty quiet. guy. He was not very, very tall, and he was starting to lose his hair, probably because of contracted kaleidoscope would be one of the reasons I would suggest that was happening. What he had, besides quietness, he had a innate confidence, I think, and he also never lost his temper. He always messed around with his mustache and stuff, and but he was someone that you would trust. You automatically would trust him because he was such a really nice guy. At the time that he was dealing with the state and dealing with state government and stuff, he was very, very effective because the rest of them was screaming. He was quiet. He would quiet people down, and in order to make it work. At one point, he wound up running the Child Care Association for the state of Illinois. And then in the beginning of 1975, he interviewed me to see if I wanted to come and work. And one of the things he told me was, I don't know how long this is going to last because we're under a lot of pressure. No one believed that you could bring these young people who are considered to be the most difficult and hard to serve out of institutions and place them in the community. In the 70s, kids would pass each other on trains, going from one state to another state, because we had some feeling in human services that people could be better served someplace else than they could be served at home. And so the institutions then who served these kids had no contact with their families in a lot of cases. And so when the young people got 18, 19, or 20, and they came back, they knew nothing about the resources from their own community. They had lost contact with their families and everything. And so our approach to them had to be some kind of way where people had that contact with families and also understood what was available to them in the communities that they lived in.
It's crazy how much of that sounds the same, doesn't it? I'm so thankful that I had that opportunity to talk with Mel and spend an afternoon with Carl, but you'll know more about that at our 50th. So make sure that you pay attention so that you can come back for our 50th and hear about that. Okay. Tom carried on this legacy as a third director of Kaleidoscope, serving from 2002 to 2014. In that time, Tom was instrumental in keeping Kaleidoscope at the forefront of care and ensuring that we could continue to go above and beyond for every family. The picture you see now behind me is a painting that was done through one of our art programs. Tom was proudly giving me a tour on my first day of Kaleidoscope through the office, and he walked through and he pointed and he said, yeah, they do this at the art camp. They say the middle guy's neat. I don't know. And it looks like Tom, if you know Tom, that was Tom. There's no question. Since his retirement, Tom stayed connected with his work and with me. He'd say, Kath, if you need me, call me. I'm here. You know, I do still know people at DCFS. And of course, he always had a sarcastic comment at the end. For those of you who know Tom, know what I'm talking about. Tom lived with cancer for many years. And for those of you who knew Tom, he did not let cancer define him. Yeah, that was something he wrote me in an email before he passed. Every time I talked or texted with him, he made it clear it was something he was living with. We've lost 2 champions in child welfare this year, and I know we have many more champions present here in this room with us tonight. Thank you for helping me honor Mel and Tom this evening. I have something for his family. His family is here. I have some framed pictures of the painting of Tom for each of you to take home with you tonight. With that, I'd like to introduce you one such champion, Bryan Samuels, the Executive Director of Chapin Hall. When Tom retired and I became the Executive Director of Kaleidoscope, he made it a point to connect me to important people, the who do you want to know in the field. Many of you are here tonight, but Bryan was first on the list. When I called Bryan to ask him if he was willing to speak tonight to honor Tom and talk more about the work he's been doing, without hesitation, he said, yes, I'd be honored. Bryan's vision has always been perfectly clear. He understands the work deeply, how it should be done, and what we need to do to get to a better place. Thank you, Bryan.
So it is true that when Kathy asked me to speak and to talk about Tom's legacy, the easy answer was yes. As I sat down to write this, it got much harder. So my conversation with you this evening begins with me admitting that I might not make it to the I met Tom in 2003 when I became the child welfare director here in the city. Tom and I worked together for 4 years. But we remained friends for another 14. I saw Tom as a rock. I knew that he would beat cancer. But today, I want to celebrate his career and his contribution to child welfare. When I met Tom, I was 36 years old. I had never worked in child welfare. I was quite literally a nobody. The day I was announced to be the director, I left my apartment and there were media trucks all out in front because nobody had a picture of me. So in order for them to run the news that day, they actually had a picture. So quite literally, I was a nobody, and I recognized that I was going to be replacing a giant. Someone who had decades of experience and someone that Tom had a great deal of respect. The first time I met Tom, he did that probing, testing, quizzing thing that he does, and he did well. He told me much later that I did not pass the test. He decided that the job was too big for me. But Tom knew how difficult the job would be. He had done the job before. Tom joined DCFS in the early 90s and stayed there through 2002. In the early days, Tom saw the child welfare system grow in size tremendously. There were around 20,000 kids in the foster care system when Tom started. 10 years later, there were more than 50,000 kids in the system. The country was going through the crack epidemic. Folks weren't sure whether these children would ever return to their families, let alone to their community. the nation's population in child welfare grew to well over 600,000, and nobody had a way out. In the beginning, Tom started in the Office of Litigation Management. How do you like that as a title? And Tom's responsibility was to oversee the federal court decree. The state of Illinois had to enter into an agreement with the federal government to fulfill its basic obligations to serve children appropriately in the foster care system. And that was Tom's job, was to monitor and document the agency's successful completion of its agreement with the federal government. However, as the numbers grew, it got much harder for Tom and the system to meet those requirements and meet the expectations of the federal judge. Later, Tom left that position and became the regional administrator for Cook County. Talking about jumping from the frying pan into the fire. At the time, Cook County alone represented 65% of all of the children in the foster care system for the entire state of Illinois. It was crazy. And everybody realized that something needed to change. And Tom and other leaders at DCFS recognized in 1997, that maybe, just maybe, they had a solution. In 1997, the Adoptions and Safe Families Act passed. It was the federal government's attempt to begin to slow down the growth of children in the foster care system. And the DCFS leadership team realized that they could put together a plan that would leverage the resources provided from the federal government and increase the likelihood that children did not grow up in foster care. So they had a plan. It had basically three parts. One part, public-private partnership. Work with all the private agencies serving children in the foster care system. Create an incentive system for them to move children as quickly and appropriately as possible through and out of the system, back home, to relatives or to adoptive families. Point one. The second part of the plan was to provide what was called adoption or guardianship sponsorship, right? They were providing supportive resources for people who were willing to adopt or relatives who were willing to take guardianship of their children. Basically, they did the math and they realized that they could provide the same level of service that children were receiving in foster care by giving those families the money to be able to purchase those services outside the system. And simply by being able to turn over the responsibility to people who would love and care for children on a permanent basis, they could actually save the state money. And the third component of the plan was to just stop taking so many damn kids. And it turned out that it actually worked. It was difficult. One of Tom's former colleagues even said that Tom's wit and sense of humor was really helpful in some of the darkest days of that plan. But within 5 years of implementing that plan, the state of Illinois was able to cut in half the number of children in foster care. It was called the Illinois Miracle. During that same period of time, Tom transitioned from the regional administrator's role into the chief of staff for operations. where he oversaw psychiatric hospitalizations, residential treatment, behavioral health, and any issue that emerged in the meeting. So Tom's job was to put out all of the fires. But it was really in that role that he said that he realized the downside to the miracle that had been accomplished. That he recognized that those three strategies didn't, in and of itself, solve all of the problems. And he came to recognize that older youth, young people with behavioral health needs, were often the kids that got bounced around the system, never having their needs met, while other children were focused on and moved through and out of the system. So he recognized that there were winners and losers in that policy. And so when he left the department in 2002 to come to Kaleidoscope, he did so under the belief that he could right the ship, that he could fix it, that he could find and develop a better way of supporting the young people who weren't so easy to get out of the system, for young people who didn't have a home to go back to, for young people who had decided that they were prepared to age out of the system rather than be adopted or taken under guardianship. And so Tom saw a way to use Kaleidoscope as the beginning of a strategy of meeting the needs and expectations of children for whom the earlier policies were inadequate. Again, as I began this conversation, I told you that in the early days that Tom kept his distance. And as a matter of fact, he watched me pick a fight with the largest private agency in the state. And like a schoolyard, it felt to me like everybody stood around and cheered. But no one offered a hand of help. The fight lasted a year. It was very public. It was really complicated. And there was nothing but bad news. But in that fight, I ultimately was forced to systematically take apart the agency. And in doing that, we had to close down the program. And as difficult as that was, as many shockwaves as it sent across the system, then Tom stepped forward with his crooked smile, declared me the victor. And in that, he was telling me that I had earned his respect and that I had found a partner. Somebody who was willing to teach and give and trade back and forth and challenge and never bullshit. I had earned his respect and it meant the world to me. But Tom also knew that Kaleidoscope needed to change. And he recognized that the original design for the program wasn't meeting the needs of the children who were responsible, that he was responsible at the time. Tom talked about prevention. He talked about evidence. He talked about taking as few of these kids as humanly possible. He railed against the racism existent in society and in the system. And he was convinced that if he was able to give families just a little more money and a little more support, there were maybe some of these kids that never needed to come into the system. So Tom looked at me and saw an opportunity to build a different program, to take a different approach, to solve problems that he had been unable to solve in his roles at DCFS. He also shared with me a little secret, that the problems that I had seen in the program that I had to dismantle All I had to do was turn to the next program and I could have found the same problem. He said he was too worried about people having overhead they couldn't afford to pay, holding on to kids longer than they needed to be held on to, trying to serve kids with very different needs with the exact same program, always struggling to have enough staff to do the work the right way, and putting way too many kids on psychotropic medication. Tom and I agreed that much of the behavior that we saw in young people, the ones who struggled the most, were more attributable to the trauma that they had experienced in the abusive homes from which they came, the trauma that they experienced transitioning into the system. And if the only thing we did was to keep our arms around them and then pass them on to adults, they would never achieve their full potential. Tom also recognized that young people needed to be prepared for adulthood. So Elizabeth and a number of other really creative folks at DCFS came to the conclusion that young people, not only did they need to be prepared for adulthood, but those that were in college needed to understand the workforce. They needed to understand what was possible from the degrees for which they were getting. And so we created this thing called Find Your Future. It was an internship. Elizabeth and I had a bunch of friends. We took the Rolodex that we had from all of those friends and we said, we need help calling companies and asking them to sponsor young people for the summer. I think the first summer we got 25 or 30. I think the next summer we got 40 or 50. We probably topped that out at about 50. But it was the coolest thing. It was amazing. Tom loved it. Thought we were crazy, but loved it. And so as I was leaving DCFS, Elizabeth and I decided that there was only one person who could take over the program. And that was Tom. And he said, of course. He did ask where the money was going to come from. I told him not to worry about that. I don't know where the money came from. But I'm getting close to the end. So Tom was creative. He was committed. He was passionate. He paid particular attention to mentoring people. There are a number of folks in the room today who would call Tom a mentor, but he really did see himself as a role model and somebody that needed to invest in the next generation of child welfare leaders in the state of Illinois. Tom found the energy and the time to invest in those people. And I can assure you that they are all great. Tom also mentored a young 11-year-old boy who was in care because he had dropped a 5-year-old to that child's death from the 14th floor of the CHA building. Few people would have chosen to help that young person. And Tom found the strength and the will to do so. When Tom was diagnosed with cancer the first time, I was in DC. The next time home, we spent some time together. And even in the early days, he was able to speak about death. Death that he came to accept. More importantly, that he prepared for. He once even said to me that cancer made him a better person. Today, I'd like to celebrate Tom's commitment to making child welfare better. He was a passionate truth teller. A change agent and a friend. Thank you. Bryan, for sharing that story and for giving all of us insight into Tom was. And we're thankful for the journey that you all went through. And we stand here as products of that. So let's give Bryan another hand. All right, we've heard so many great words on tonight. We've been given the full picture of what Kaleidoscope is. And as promised, I'll come back to you guys with the spoken word piece. Now, I need one person. If somebody raise your hand really quick, a volunteer. Anybody? Okay, I got it. Oh, wait. Over here? Okay. I'll get this person. Yeah, yeah. If you could come here really quick and grab these words, I'm not going to make you get up on stage, I promise you. Yes. You just need to keep me honest, okay? Yes. So those are the words that I were given. So as I go through my spoken word piece, she's gonna now they're in order as well. So they're in order of the way that where they are in my piece. So you'll keep me honest, and when I'm done, you'll be able to be like, they were all in there. Because I don't want anybody to think, okay, did he really include all 10 of those words? So here we go, and I hope you guys enjoy this. Two men standing shoulder to shoulder like Spartans at the hot gates. Their posture is set, feet cradling at the threshold of a river that's still flowing to this day, staring down at their reflections, taking in the sight of themselves. But within the ripples and buried between the stones of this pond, they notice their story of an organization that would provide water. This river is comprised of purpose and strength, minerals that would nourish a thirsty people, parched from this chaos we call life, ready to cut their journey short, vulnerable to the forces of nature. They envisioned an oasis, a vision of hope filled with colors of triumph. So they build, told to err on the side of cautions. Haters told them and tried to convince them that building this monument of hope would never work. But their passion wouldn't let them quit. Assembling the Avengers that would never get any screen time, with true identities hidden behind laughter and humor. A reminder that even in the toughest of times, you can still have joy. They set families free. Social workers, counselors, intact family specialists, and coordinators run headfirst into war with a battle cry that got the attention of the city, shouting from mountains of victory that we all have to be empathetic, or we could lose the soul of humanity. They built a community of heroes that stand between poverty and systematic racism and dare them to pass their battle line. They stand at the threshold of doorways and tell families they can still be whole. They exist in the midst of art camps and foster the next creative generation. They encourage already grateful hearts to stand on their own 2 feet before they head into the real world. They teach children the lesson early that trauma is not the end of their story. This is the manifestation of a journey taken by 2 men, Tom and Mel. We now stand beside you, warriors in arms at the threshold of this river. The past, present, and future collide to produce a word that still instills faith in the midst of hopelessness. Kaleidoscope. One word, 4 syllables, infinite impact. Thank you, guys. All right, here we are. Here we are. Was it one that I missed?